10 gemstones that react to human emotions. Some gemstones don't just stay in one place. They move, ever so slightly when you do. Not all reactions are visible. However, under the right conditions, a handful of natural minerals have been observed to respond to changes in body temperature, light angle, or electrical pressure, all of which can fluctuate in response to human emotions. These aren't imaginary. These are measurable effects. One stone vibrates when subjected to stress, another darkness when placed in the palm of an anxious hand, and some, like Moldavite, have been removed from healing rooms altogether, not because they're ineffective, but because they cause too much emotional intensity. Across cultures, over the decades, these materials have not been chosen for their beauty. They were chosen because people felt them and continue to touch them, long before science could explain them. In today's episode, we look at 10 gemstones that do more than reflect light. They respond to something much more volatile, ourselves. Don't forget to press and hold that like button, leave a comment, and hit subscribe before we begin. Ranked 10th, Kyanite, the alignment stone. Most gemstones respond to heat, light, or magnetism, but there is one mineral that draws attention by doing almost nothing at all. Kyanite appears unassuming, a silicate blade, pale to deep blue, sometimes with a silver sheen. But when mineralogists tested its hardness, the results were contradictory. On one axis, it measures around 4.5 on the Mohs scale. On the perpendicular, it jumps to 7. This rare anisotropic behavior, changing hardness based on direction, has become central to why some believe kyanite interacts with human emotion. Not through biochemical mechanisms, but through symbolism. Through the idea that, like a disoriented inner state, kyanite has axes of misalignment and pathways to restore them. Historically, kyanite held no sacred role. It wasn't placed in tombs, carved into amulets, or mentioned in ancient medical texts. But in the late 20th century, it quietly entered the practices of meditation teachers, energy healers, and psychological support groups. Unlike stones that pulse when electrically charged or cool to the touch, kyanite feels inert. And yet, in modern circles, it's often recommended not for stimulation, but for stillness. Some describe the act of holding kyanite as a slow process, slower thoughts, slower breath, a sense that the nervous system is recalibrating. These experiences remain anecdotal. There's no clinical research showing any physiological change. No measurable energy fields, no verified interactions with brainwaves or neurotransmitters, and yet, in a world where emotional balance is more subjective than scientific, kyanite has found a quiet place. Not because it does something, but because it doesn't. Not because it heals, but because it holds still. There's no evidence kyanite reacts to human emotion, but many have come to feel a difference when it's near, not through skin or nerve or measurable frequency, but through something else, a system science hasn't yet modeled, the repeated human experience of calm in the presence of something unmoving. Ranked 9th, Fluorite, the mind stabilizer. The mind craves structure. Even in chaos, it scans for patterns, a point of alignment, a frame of stillness. That might explain why so many hands over centuries and across civilizations have reached for one particular mineral, fluorite. Chemically simple, physically exact. Fluorite is calcium fluoride, yet under the Earth's conditions, it crystallizes into forms that seem calculated, architectural. Perfect cubes, octahedrons, step-like terminations that suggest order where none should exist. No random growth, no wild fractures, just symmetry. Among minerals, few display this level of geometric clarity so consistently, and fewer still match it with optical response. When exposed to ultraviolet light, fluorite fluoresces intensely, sometimes green, sometimes blue, even purple. It was the first mineral that gave rise to this phenomenon, fluorescence. Not because it wanted to be seen, but because the structure itself emitted something when it was charged, a reaction of electrons, not metaphor, physics. Its color range is vast, spanning from pale yellow to deep violet, often in distinct bands. But fluorite is not prized for saturation, it's prized for segmentation. A specimen can hold multiple zones, as if thoughts, emotions, or mental states had been folded into layers, visible, discrete, organized. The Roman Empire carved it into drinking vessels prized as luxuries. The Chinese Qing elite shaped it into seals for scholars. In both cases, it wasn't mystical power that drew attention. It was precision. The material didn't erode easily. It fractured cleanly. It held intention in form. By the late 20th century, fluorite reemerged in an entirely different context. Therapy rooms and meditation spaces. The desks of people are overwhelmed by cognitive load. There was no manual, no dogma, only repetition of placement, of presence. Practitioners began associating green fluorite with calm, purple with insight, and clear fluorite with neutrality. None of these claims is confirmed biologically. No evidence links this mineral to neurotransmitter activity or measurable emotional shifts. But even in the absence of proof, the behavior continued, not because of belief in unseen energy, but because of what's visible: structure, form, geometry that seems immune to distortion. In a world that demands constant adaptability, there's something unnervingly powerful about a stone that does not shift. That remains precisely what it is. Emotion, unlike crystals, resists symmetry. It swells, collapses, and reforms. But when minds reach toward stillness, many reach toward objects that do not ripple in return. Fluorite doesn't absorb feelings. It doesn't reflect them. It simply remains, exact, fluorescent, and unchanged. Ranked 8th, Sugilite, the empath's shield. Some stones carry centuries of ritual, myth, and cultural significance. Sugilite arrived without any of that. It wasn't pulled from a tomb. It didn't crown a priest or protect a burial site. It didn't even exist in the jewelry markets until the late 20th century. First described in 1944 by Japanese geologist Kenichi Sugi, it remained obscure until the 1970s, when gem-quality material surfaced deep beneath South Africa's Kalahari Desert. It was purple. It was dense. And almost overnight, it began appearing not in museums, but in metaphysical shops. By the 1980s, a narrative had formed around it. This stone, they said, had shielding properties. Not physical, not electrical, emotional. Among empaths, people who report absorbing the moods and energies of others, Sugilite became something like armor, a silent block, a filter between inner state and outer chaos. No ancient text mentions it. No healer from antiquity described their field. But as the world accelerated, socially, emotionally, digitally, Sugilite's following grew. Practitioners claimed it quieted racing thoughts, reduced emotional overload, helped insulate during conflict, especially when no resolution was possible. Some placed it between the eyes. Others wore it during therapy. Some just kept it in a pocket during high-pressure environments. Hospitals, courtrooms, classrooms. The reports were rarely loud. Just phrases like, "I could breathe again," or "I didn't take on their pain this time." No double-mass studies were ever done. No measurable field was confirmed. No change in blood pressure, cortisol, or EEG patterns. But even skeptics acknowledge the consistency of the descriptions. And in psychology, consistency matters. If a non-biological object helps individuals maintain boundaries, even symbolically, it becomes functionally real in experience, if not in science. Sugilite doesn't fluoresce. It doesn't conduct current. It doesn't fragment into perfect geometry. However, it occupies space in a way that many find stabilizing, as if the stone's very absence of myth makes it available for present-day needs. In a landscape where emotional overstimulation has become the daily norm, Sugilite didn't inherit a legend. It became one, not because of history, but because of repetition. Ranked 7th, Amber, the ancient nerve stone. Amber is not a crystal. It doesn't fracture. It doesn't refract. It doesn't originate in mineral veins, but in forests that are long gone. What humans call amber began as resin. Secreted by conifers under stress, it flowed from broken bark, carrying antimicrobial compounds meant to seal wounds. What followed was not an act of healing, but preservation. Over tens of millions of years, the volatile oils evaporated. The resin polymerized, hardened, and fossilized. A living fluid turned inert. By the time Homo sapiens emerged, amber had already formed, and as early as 11,000 BCE, it was being collected, carved, and buried. Archaeologists in Lithuania uncovered necklaces buried with children from the Mesolithic period. In each grave, amber was placed near the throat or sternum. Never randomly, always along lines of breath, speech, or pulse. To the Greeks, amber was electron. It held a static charge when rubbed with a cloth, one of the first materials known to behave this way. For them, this charge implied vitality, life force, and from that root, modern electricity takes its name. In Rome, Pliny the Elder cataloged amber as both ornament and medicine. He wrote that women wore it during childbirth. Healers prescribed it for anxiety, sore throats, and seizures. In China, amber was burned in court rituals to calm sorrow. In Persia, ground amber was mixed into paste applied behind the ears to stabilize vision during grief. Across the Northern Hemisphere, amber was not merely a gem, it was a substance of regulation. It didn't glow, it didn't sing, but it changed when held. The body warmed it. The warmth released a scent, pine, resin, subtle sweetness. The olfactory system, tied directly to the limbic brain, registered it immediately. Calm was not delivered, it was recalled. Modern science has extracted succinic acid from Baltic amber, a compound that, according to lab models, interacts with the parasympathetic nervous system. But no study has ever demonstrated transdermal delivery through skin. The acid remains locked in the resin. The effect remains anecdotal, and yet amber continues to circulate in therapy rooms as infant teething beads in energy healing kits. It is not seen as powerful, it is seen as stable, a substance that has survived collapse, compression, and extinction, and still responds to the heat of a hand. What makes amber emotionally durable isn't proof, it's time, a timeline without interruption, a record of calming presence, unbroken for more than 13,000 years, across language, culture, and belief. In the language of science, amber has no measurable emotional output, but in the memory of humanity, it has never needed one. Ranked 6th. Moonstone, the cyclical mirror. Some stones shimmer, this one doesn't. It pulses, silently, like something remembering the shape of light. Moonstone is a feldspar, but that word alone doesn't explain what people see when they turn it slowly under a lamp. Not flash, not sparkle, but a dulurescence, a blue-white glow that moves across the surface like a tide, as if light didn't bounce, but drifted. For over 2,000 years, humans have looked at this phenomenon and felt something emotional stir. And though cultures never agreed on why, they rarely disagreed that moonstone had something to do with rhythm. In southern India, it is still laid on the tongue by astrologers, a brief contact ritual believed to heighten intuition. In temples, it is worn by women on nights when the moon waxes. The stone is called Chandrakant Mani, beloved of the moon. There it's not jewelry, it's a vessel for inner calibration. The Romans long before claimed moonstone was born from solidified moonlight. They wore it during lunar rites and left it under pillows to calm dreams. To them, the stone's glow didn't just reflect the moon, it carried some of its rhythm. In Roman calendars, the lunar rhythm was inseparable from emotional regulation. Across Islamic cultures in the Middle Ages, moonstone became a talisman for travelers and women. Its sheen was said to cool agitation, to harmonize the mood, not with incantation or scripture, but by visual logic. Stones that flickered softly were thought to disarm intensity. In 19th century Europe, amid the Art Nouveau movement, moonstone reappeared, not in temples or amulets, but in brooches and rings designed for women navigating societal expectations and psychic restrictions. It became again a symbol of unspoken tides, internal emotion set against rigid structures. Today, moonstone is used across yoga studios, fertility centers, and grief groups. It's never advertised as a cure, but always as a mirror, something to sit with, carry, or wear while emotional systems adjust, especially in bodies that experience cycles, such as hormonal, seasonal, or psychological cycles. There is no evidence that moonstone balances neurotransmitters or affects endocrine function. Its glow isn't reactive to hormones, But what it does respond to, light, angle, motion, and temperature, feels familiar to anyone who's lived inside a shifting emotional body. It's not that Moonstone controls emotion, it's that it has always reflected the part of us that changes with time and returns. Ranked fifth, Lepidolite, the lithium layer. Among all the stones linked to emotion, this one is chemically closest to a prescription. But it doesn't medicate, it only sits. Light, fragile, unstable. Lepidolite is a mica, a phyllosilicate. Soft, layered, almost weightless. When held, it doesn't ground the hand. It flickers, it flakes. It responds to pressure, not with resistance, but with surrender. And in that, many have found a reflection of their nervous system. Geologically, lepidolite is notable for one reason. It contains lithium. It's one of the most essential lithium-bearing minerals on Earth, mined for industrial and pharmaceutical use. But in its raw form, that lithium is locked, bound inside silicate layers. No contact with skin will release it. Nobody will absorb it. Still, the association remains. And it's that association, not the chemistry, that built lepidolite's reputation in emotional support spaces. Beginning in the late 20th century, lepidolite began appearing in meditation rooms, support groups, and healing practices across North America and Europe. Not as a mystical object, but as an emotional companion, a placeholder for calm. Its lilac tone reads softly. Its surface cools quickly. Its edges split easily. It doesn't demand presence, it allows it. Therapists began placing it in trauma recovery settings. Midwives placed it near women navigating hormonal shock. It became the stone of transitions, not just grief or anxiety, but the long spaces in between. No data shows lepidolite lowers cortisol, regulates serotonin, or adjusts limbic response. But there is measurable behavior. People return to it. They hold it during breathwork. Keep it near during insomnia. Give it to loved ones when they don't have answers. Only presence. Unlike harder stones, lepidolite crumbles. It doesn't endure impact. It cannot be cut for brilliance. That may be why it's chosen. In a world that prizes strength, a mineral that doesn't resist becomes emotionally honest. Emotion is rarely solid. Neither is lepidolite. It fractures easily, but in doing so it stays close. Ranked fourth, rose quartz, the emotion keeper. It doesn't glow, it doesn't pulse, it doesn't change color when held or warmed. But for over 9,000 years, this stone has been the place where people quietly leave their emotions. Rose quartz is a member of the quartz family, chemically simple, structurally strong, and globally abundant. Its pink hue comes not from magic, but trace elements: titanium, iron, and manganese. The shade varies, but its tone is unmistakable, gentle, blunted, and soft-edged, like skin or memory. In Mesopotamia, as early as 7000 BCE, fragments of pink quartz were carved into seals and worn against the body. No instructions survived, just repetition. The stone appears in burial sites, love offerings, and healing bundles. In ancient Egypt, rose quartz was ground and applied to the skin to slow aging, not just physical, but spiritual aging as well. Records from early dynastic tombs refer to pink stone as part of afterlife transition packs, placed near the chest. The Greeks named it after Aphrodite. The Romans gave it as a sign of reconciliation after betrayal. In Chinese courts, it was kept in desk drawers and bedside boxes to counteract emotional stagnation. None of these cultures interacted directly, but each, across thousands of miles and hundreds of years, arrived at the same conclusion. This stone had something to do with love, but not romantic love, not always. Sometimes grief, sometimes forgiveness, sometimes the ache of not being able to name what you feel. By the late 20th century, rose quartz had become a cultural artifact of emotion itself. No longer just a talisman, it entered therapy sessions, hospice centers, addiction programs, and circles of personal crisis. People didn't expect it to fix anything. They used it because they couldn't carry what they felt within themselves. Rose quartz doesn't change when it's held, but people do. Its surface stays cold. Its structure doesn't vibrate. It has no measurable effect on the nervous system. And yet it is passed from hand to hand when words no longer work. not as a transmitter, not as a cure, as a container. Ranked third, Labradorite, the awakener. Most stones reward stability. This one rewards movement, not on the hand, of the eye, of the mind, trying to keep up. Labradorite is a type of feldspar, similar to Moonstone, but with a more volatile composition. In stillness, it looks gray. In motion, it shatters into light, blue, green, gold, sometimes purple, sometimes red, colors that weren't painted on, but produced by layers so thin they can't be seen. This is not color, it's interference. Light is trying to pass through, but is being forced to scatter. Labradorescence. No two stones flash the same way. Some don't flash at all unless you find the right angle. It doesn't reflect what's there. It demands repositioning from the viewer. In Inuit oral history, Labradorite was once believed to be the prison of the aurora borealis. A warrior, legend says, struck it with a spear, freeing the sky. The fragments that remained kept the light trapped inside. Not a metaphor, an observation. Because Labradorite doesn't offer comfort, it provides a sense of interruption. In Finland, soldiers once wore it under uniforms, not for safety, but for clarity. In North America and Europe, from the 1980s onward, it began appearing in ritual spaces, not for peace, but for psychological rupture. Meditation guides warned that Labradorite wasn't passive. It activated, caused dream intensity, rapid idea bursts, memory recall, emotional vertigo. There is no field emitted, no magnetic signature. However, there is a perceptual aspect. People report experiencing agitation, acceleration, or rapid insight within hours of wearing it. Not always positive, but often repeated. Labradorite doesn't resonate like quartz. It doesn't warm like amber, but it moves, not by itself, but in response to the smallest turn. It refuses to show you everything at once, forces you to hunt. In moments of emotional overload, this stone fails to provide a sense of stability. It exposes, not because it has power, but because it behaves like the inner mind under pressure. Hard to read, full of angles, refusing stillness. It is not a stone of comfort, it is a stone of confrontation, and in that confrontation, some people wake up. Ranked second, Moldavite, the overwhelmer. Some stones are placed in the palm. This one is pulled away, often before anyone understands why. Moldavite is not a crystal, it's glass, but not the kind formed in volcanoes or cooled in labs. Roughly 15 million years ago, a meteor collided with what's now southern Germany. The impact vaporized rock, launched it into the atmosphere, and what returned to Earth cooled midair. It didn't feel like rain. It landed like a memory, and for a long time no one knew what it was. In the 1800s, collectors began cataloging the translucent green fragments scattered across Bohemia. The pieces had odd textures, pitted, wrinkled, chaotic. Unlike obsidian, unlike any volcanic product, the chemical signature indicated that an extraterrestrial force altered the material. What you hold in your hand was once part of Earth, briefly not, and then returned, permanently changed. It looks alien, and increasingly, people say it feels that way too. Moldavite has no mythological record. It wasn't worn by queens or buried with kings, but since the 1990s, it has developed a global reputation for doing something no gemstone was ever meant to do. Disrupt. Practitioners call it accelerative, but the word most often used is overwhelming. First-time users describe a sharp sense of heat, dizziness, crying, heart racing. Dreams become graphic, fragmented, hypersaturated. Some users remove the stone within minutes, some never try again, and yet none of this is physically measurable. No magnetic field, no EM interference, no chemical seepage, just a pattern. Emotional overload, reported by strangers, consistent across language and belief. Is it a suggestion? Possibly, but the data point isn't the stone. It's the human response to its presence. And when thousands of people describe the same unexplainable reaction, the question changes from is it real to why is it repeating? Therapists who allow Moldavite in clinical rooms often remove it within days, not for ethical violation, For atmosphere, clients begin weeping without cause. Sessions derail. Energy workers warn, this isn't a stone to wear casually. It isn't used to soothe. It's used to rupture. There is no ancient origin myth for Moldavite, but there is something more dangerous. A modern pattern, strong enough, strange enough, and repeated often enough that even those who don't believe eventually set it down. In first place, Alexandrite, the color of emotion. 2 colors, 1 stone, no single truth. Alexandrite does not fluoresce. It does not glow in the dark. It doesn't heat, vibrate, or pulse. It changes color, but only when you move, or when the light does. And that was enough for an empire to assign it emotional consequence. Discovered in the Ural Mountains of Russia in 1830, it was named for a future czar, Alexander II, on the day of his coming of age. The colors it displayed matched the imperial guard, green in daylight, red under flame. But it wasn't the political alignment that made Alexandrite different. It was perceptual instability. Under direct sun or white fluorescent light, it appears emerald green, sharp, calm, alert. Under incandescent bulbs or candlelight, it turns a deep purplish red, warm, consuming, and internal. This is not an illusion, it is physics. Chromium atoms in the crystal matrix absorb light differently across color temperatures. But for those who wore it, the shift was never explained. It was felt. In 19th century Russia, Alexandrite was not only adopted by aristocrats, but also by writers, intellectuals, and dissidents. The stone was interpreted as a badge of complexity, a mineral that refused to settle, that changed under pressure, or when questioned. To Chekhov's characters, a stone that couldn't hold a single color mirrored the modern psyche, reactive, dependent on context, vulnerable to environment. No laboratory has found that Alexandrite affects emotional state. However, few stones in history have been assigned emotional symbolism as directly from their optical behavior. Green for the public face, red for the inner state. A visual metaphor before psychology had language for it. In modern metaphysical spaces, Alexandrite is classified as a stone of emotional intelligence. However, this label emerged late centuries after it had already been associated with duality, perception, and control. The change was never dramatic. It was subtle, which is why it lingered. Today, Alexandrite remains one of the rarest gems in the world, not because it's hard to mine, but because it's hard to define. Every shift in light reveals a different version of the same structure. Stable lattice, unstable appearance. No other gemstone has been viewed as consistently emotionally reactive without ever claiming to act. It doesn't channel. It doesn't stabilize. It doesn't comfort. It shows. What makes a gemstone valuable isn't always its clarity, rarity, or cut. Sometimes it's the way people keep returning to it, not for what it proves, but for what it reflects. Each of these 10 stones is situated within a measurable geological context, but around them a second layer has formed, a record of human interaction. Trembling hands, calmer breath, sudden distance. No lab has confirmed these responses, and yet they persist across cultures, across generations, across belief. Perhaps the question is no longer whether these stones react to us, but why, when they do, we remember it.